Hello, everyone. Those are coming in. Just please share your name, what program you're coming from, what city you hail from, and make sure you do it under the panelist and audience chat box, not just to us panelists. We'll give it a few more minutes, give some more people chances to join us today. For those who just came in, please put your name, the program that you're representing, and what city you hail from. We just want everyone to kind of just, introduce each other via the chat box, but make sure you do hit all attendees and panelists instead of just to us panelists. All right, good morning. It is 11:06. I'm gonna just decide to just start it now. For those that are just coming in, like I said, just please introduce yourself, your name, what program you represent, and what city you're hailing from. I just wanna learn everyone, and hello to everyone that is here right now. I'm just going through the chat box and just um, learning everyone where they're coming from. Someone's from Atlanta, Georgia. A few folks, there's Jersey. Wow, okay. And of course, everyone from Maryland. And welcome back to those who have joined us in our previous webinars. So today's webinar is creating a diversified funding strategy. I'll be your host today, Sarah Haile. I'm the operations manager for Maryland Mentor. And we have Kera Ritter as our facilitator today, and I'll be introducing you all to you all soon. So who is Maryland Mentor? Those who have joined us from previous webinars and trainings probably already know the same spiel we kind of give, but for those who are joining us for the first time today, who we are one of 28 affiliates of Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership. We just celebrated our 2-year anniversary, January 2018. However, our roots do date back to 1996. If you want to know more about that history, feel free to email us and just, or even have like a Zoom chat just to learn even more about Maryland Mentor. Our mission, which is really the same mission across all the affiliates, is to fuel the quality and quantity of mentoring relationships across the state and to close the mentoring gap with the same vision that every young person will have the caring adult relationships they need to grow and develop into thriving, productive, and engaged adults. And how do we do this? We support the mentoring programs and organizations that support young people. So here are some ways how our support looks like. There's a mentoring.org website that you can find essentially all, like even the NMRC, the National Mentoring Resource Center, essentially it's just a hub of everything mentoring that you can think of. So there's publications, there's trainings, there's just ways to connect with other mentoring programs across the nation, and also just to get a hold of national itself. There's also a mentoring connector. So this is a chance for your program to be in this national database where families can find this program, find your program, as well as volunteers can find your program to become mentors. Feel free to email me to get more information on how your program could be a mentoring connector. This is a really great opportunity just to expand your program out there to those who don't know about it. And then we have our own, own website. There's marylandmentor.net/events. So we've been having a lot of different webinars and trainings during, really just period, but especially even more during this COVID, time period where we just want everyone to stay connected and not feel as though we're not, have forgotten the programs that we support. And then of course, there's elements of effective practice for mentoring. So this is a handbook that you can get for free that you can download if you go to our website, and the PDF will show up on your inbox. So then there's also the NQMS. We have technical assistant consultants who can explain to you more about NQMSs, but essentially this is just a assessment of figuring out, is your program where it is, or how else can it improve? And of course, the technical assistance, it is free for all programs. I advise you to apply ASAP, and I can walk you through it. And what that is basically is that you'll have a consultant work with you, try to figure out what are the flaws that you may have and how better you can improve your program, whether that's getting more mentors or more funding. So these are just several ways that we support the programs, mentoring programs across the state of Maryland. And these are additional tools. Here's the handbook that I was explaining to you all, Elements of Effective Practice for Mentoring. This is the step-by-step how to get free technical assistance. And feel free to also just chat with me privately if you do want to get more information on any of these things I had just mentioned. So quickly, webinar logistics. So all attendees will remain muted unless called upon by the speaker. So I will be able to unmute you during the Q&A section. So there is a Q&A box as well as a chat box. So please, if there's any questions as Kera is speaking, please put all questions in the Q&A box. We don't want to get the questions, lost amidst the chat box, where a lot of people are going to be sharing different moments, which goes on to number 3. So the chat box is really just for, aha moments, or if you yourself want to share additional resources, or just, responding to something that the speaker has said, or that you saw someone speak on the chat box. And then there's also a raise hand feature where you're able to actually speak when, when I enable it, instead of just chatting in the chat box. And then towards the end, there is going to be an evaluation link in the chat box, which we will share before Kera answers any questions, because we don't want people to start disappearing. So evaluation links the evaluation survey is very important. We want to know if this is the type of training that you guys would like to see in the future, and how else we can improve our trainings and the webinars. So please do fill this survey out. And yeah, and most importantly, just, be engageful, learn, and have fun. So today I'm super excited to, introduce y'all to Kera Ritter. She is, not only one of our Maryland, mentors, tremendous technical assistant consultant, but she honestly is just the boss all around. And this is a lovely Kera Ritter. Here's a picture. She's also, you can see her face once she starts speaking. But real quickly, here's her bio. Kera Ritter is the president of the Ritter Group LLC, a consulting firm which helps organizations and leaders solve their most difficult challenges, particularly during times of crisis. Kera is a former president and CEO of Big Brothers and Big Sisters of the Greater Chesapeake, a nonprofit serving almost 1,000 youth in the greater Baltimore area. And in less than 2 years, she took this nonprofit that was steeped in debt, stabilized it, and guided its transition into Big Brothers, Big Sisters of the Y, while keeping the organization solvent and exceeding national program standards. And something I just learned, which is really cool, is that during Kera's former life, she was an award-winning journalist at renowned outlets. So for that 15 years that she was in journalism, she chronicled the intersection of race, class, and gender, and the impact of public policy on social issues such as child welfare, workforce development, criminal justice. And then following her career in journalism, Kera served as a foreign affairs officer for the U.S. Department of State. So without further ado, please welcome Ms. Kera Ritter. Kera, the mic is all yours.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that. Good morning, everybody. This is the one thing I don't like about the Zoom webinars. You're talking and you don't get a lot of feedback. And we're a chatty group. We like to have that conversation back and forth. So as Sarah said before, please use the chat feature. If I say something and you like it, love to see that chat pop up. If I say something and you don't like it, please absolutely, chime in as well. So just very briefly, let's go through the agenda for today's session. We'll do a welcome and overview. And then we're going to get into budgets. And notice I said the real budget, not the one that you tell people, but what actually happens in your organization. And then we'll talk about programming during COVID-19 and revenue resources. We're going to have some real talk, because those of you who know me know we're always going to have some real talk. You may hear some things that you don't particularly like, but somebody's got to say it. And then we have a conversation about how to move forward. And then we'll do questions and close out. So if you saw this presentation last year, it's going to be a little bit different because we do live in COVID-19 times, and it definitely has an impact on how organizations are funding their programming. If this is the first time you've seen it, I've actually cut out some of the details that I would normally cover. So if you feel like I gave short shrift to something, or you want to hear about something else, please use that Q&A feature to say, hey, can you please talk about this, or can you please address this particular issue? All right. Next slide. Thank you. All right, so I am generally not the kind of person that likes to do check-ins. I like to get in, do the business, keep it moving. But these are times where we absolutely must take a pause every day. first for ourselves and then with the people that we work with. The world is really crazy right now. And so it starts to have an impact on how we present and how we engage. So every morning, I encourage everybody to take a moment and think about, how am I feeling today? Are my loved ones healthy? Before you get on the phone with a colleague or a Zoom call, talk to your colleague. How's your colleague doing? What about their family? It's amazing what we're hearing about health challenges or just fear or, shortage of some essential needs that, again, have an impact on how people show up. And so by taking that moment, we can, one, just be there for one another, and then two, help ourselves in the long run by building those relationships. Everything that we do is about relationships. Our work is about relationships. Even building that funding strategy is about relationships. And of course, be kind to yourself right now. If sometimes you're thinking, well, I should be able to work and my kids are home and I have to help them with their homework and I have to do all these things. If you can't take care of yourself and be healthy, then you can't take care of anyone else. So again, just like to take that moment to remind folks, please do that. I hope that each of you is well, that your loved ones are well, that you have groceries, and that you're safe. All right, next slide, please. Okay, budgets. I normally spend a lot of time talking about a budget and talking about what a budget should look like. Right now, what we're seeing though is even under the best of circumstances, where you may have a budget that you hit every year, it may be looking very different for you. Now, if you are a startup and you haven't done this, you gotta have a budget. And sometimes people say, I don't have revenue, I'm just starting. You are spending some type of money or capital to do the work, even if you're just buying snacks for kids, or they're going on a field trip and maybe it is donated. You have donated tickets for something, you're still driving people somewhere. So you do have expenses. So then it's about thinking, okay, how do I begin to figure out what's my revenue? Start with the budget that says, this is what I'm spending, and then start to build toward, okay, then this is what I need to find a way to raise. And sometimes, again, if you're a startup or you're smaller, your budget is, your budget is small. You say, well, I'm kind of paying for it out of pocket. Start getting into the habit of doing the annual budget and then looking at it every month, because you want to get out of the habit of commingling your personal funds with your organizational funds. And so I'm specifically addressing this because I did read the survey responses that came in, and there were a number of organizations that said, I don't have a budget, or my budget is zero, budget's for zero. You might have zero, but your budget is never zero. And so I wanted to just take a moment to address some of those things right now. Again, there's nothing wrong with only having a little something, but you have to be able to document that. And so right now, what I'm encouraging organizations to do is to look at your annual budget and determine, what have I raised to date? What did I think I would raise by now? Sometimes we'll do a budget and say, okay, I'm going to raise $50,000, but we don't know what by when. You should always have a what by when. So if you're going to raise $50,000 over the year, okay, what will I have raised by the end of January, the end of February, the end of March, or whatever your fiscal year is? That should be laid out. You should be looking at it and realizing, am I on track or am I short? And then we start to look ahead. What do I expect to raise this year? The world has changed significantly, and so funding cycles have been disrupted. So thinking through, okay, people have lost their jobs, and so I may not have the donors that I used to, and our biggest gala of the year is being canceled because of physical distancing. What do I think I'm going to come up with between now and the end of my fiscal year? And then what is my gap? Now, if you have a gap every year, then you should expect to have a gap this year. But if you normally have a balanced budget, you really want to start taking a look at, what is that gap? And then how do I begin to address it? Is it reasonable to assume I'm going to raise more money? Do I need to cut back on delivery of services? Do I need to ask people to reconsider or help them adjust the expectations of what our program is going to do? Do we serve fewer kids? Those are the conversations you want to be having now if you haven't already had them. All right, let's go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, the funder relationship. Very often when people have nonprofits, the first thing they talk about when it comes to funding is grants. I'm going to get grants. I'm going to talk to this foundation. I'm going to hopefully go out and get this money. And I've heard there's money out there. One of the first things that we do in the grant cycle of a funder, in the funder relationship, when we're talking about grants, is think about, are you grant ready? And some of you know exactly what that means. And some of you are thinking, of course I'm grant ready. I work with a foundation, and I can tell you that a number of organizations that come to us and swear they're grant ready are not grant ready. They do not have the infrastructure in place to receive funds. Grants are not just free money. They come with requirements, compliance, strings, etc. So first is, do you have the ability to do the things that you're saying you're going to do and to meet the funder's requirements of what they are going to expect you to do in order to document how you've used their money? Now, once you're grant ready, the next question is, do you speak funder? And some of you are thinking, well, I'm grant ready, but I don't know anybody. Like, I don't know how to get into a foundation to get the meeting. Now we're going to have a moment of real talk. The truth is that grants are actually one of the most unreliable ways to fund your organization. And that is, one, it requires relationships. And if you don't have them, they're very difficult to build. And two, you're at the mercy of someone else every year. So even if you get funded one year, you may not get funded the following year, and then you're going to have a gap. So again, think about these things before you start investing a lot of time into chasing grants. But if you decide this is the path you want to go, the question is, again, do you speak funder? Do you understand what they're talking about when they say these are our priority areas? That means these are the types of programs that they fund. Are you in the region that they fund? Again, do you have the ability to manage funds as is described in the RFP? If you were to sit down with someone who is a portfolio manager of a foundation, would you be able to understand what they're discussing when it comes to the application and compliance requirements for a grant? This is, again, about relationships. And so it's a little bit like dating, right? And we know that sometimes men and women speak differently. You may say one thing and the person across from you hears something else. And so it becomes important to understand both sides of the conversation, your side of the conversation and their side of the conversation. Along with dating, the dating analogy, it's a little bit of a dance with dealing with funders. And so there are some people who approach dating like Tinder, where you're just constantly swiping. It's like swipe, 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 apply, swipe, apply, swipe, apply, swipe. Or eHarmony, where they do that survey, the 39 or however many compatibility measures, and it's supposed to be a long-term relationship. You have to decide what's right for you. What I can tell you is that a lot of foundations really want that eHarmony type of relationship. They want to get to know you over a period of time. It's not going to be, we went to dinner one night and I gave you a grant, right? It's not going to be that one time where it's like, okay, I got everything I needed in this one date or everything I needed in this one meeting with this one funder. It's going to take a little while to build a relationship that's worth having, that continues to sustain both you and is supportive of their priority areas as well. Related to that, ghosting and stalking. We've all heard about this. I didn't know what ghosting was until several months ago. And then as I'm talking to people who are dating, and they're saying that people will just ghost you. They will just disappear, just up and leave. And I've seen organizations do this. They will start a relationship with a funder and then they will just disappear. And there are a number of reasons why it might happen, but it's never explained. And so a funder is left wondering, do you still have a program? Did something happen to you? It goes toward your credibility and reliability if you ghost someone. And so I encourage you, once you start a relationship, a conversation with a foundation, that you continue to engage in it appropriately, because the opposite side of that is stalking. And I cannot tell you the number of times that I have seen people randomly ask for a Facebook friend request, and I've met you one time. And it's because it's someone who's trying to get to funds. I've seen it, other people have seen it. It's not a good look, it's not pretty. I had another funder who goes to breakfast at a certain place every day. Talk about someone who started showing up every day at the same time. He wanted a meeting. There's a way to ask for a meeting, but interrupting someone's breakfast every day is not the way to do that. And so what you want to end up with, let's be good friends, right? Even if you have that first relationship, that first conversation, and the relationship doesn't quite progress to what you want with that particular funder, remain in touch. Let's be good friends, right? So periodically update them, check in, see how they're doing. Funders and portfolio managers are not ATM machines, they're human beings. And so they actually tend to remember people that reach out periodically, that engage appropriately. Again, like dating, you don't want to date a desperate person. I can't make payroll. You know, that's a personal problem, right? Like, you don't want to date that person. Just like you don't want to date the person that's like, I got to get married in 2 weeks. Like, no, a couple of red flags. So it's like, all right, let's work on it. Let's continue to have conversation. Let's get to know one another. That is the basis of the funder relationship. This is normal times. Really, this is all the time, but definitely in normal times. And so once you've established that, if you get a grant, next slide, please, Sarah. If you get a grant, what would normally happen is you would apply, you'd receive it, you would do the work as you described, you would complete the reports. Yes, every funder is going to ask for a number of reports. Depending on the funder, depends on the number of reports and the complexity of the reports, programmatic reports and typically expense reports. You would invite that funder for a site visit. Some funders will require that, some funders don't, but you always want to invite them. You always want to give them the opportunity to see you at your best, doing the work and supporting young people. You want to send an annual report with pictures. And the formality of that depends on what the funder asks for. Some want a formal report. Some just say, let us know, or you fill out a piece of paper. But you always want to send pictures, because that allows the funder to also say, look, this is what we did with the funds that we deployed. Here's the impact that we were able to have. And then you would repeat. This is the normal process of what happens when you receive a grant. And I want to take a moment to pause. Every time I talk to folks, I realize there are additional things that should be addressed during these conversations about funding, particularly when it comes from foundations. It is important to read your grant contract. I never thought I would have to spend time on this, but it is important. I realize that I do. A lot of times you are thinking, I want the money and I got to sign to get it. So I'm gonna sign so I can get this check. But you want to read the contract and ask questions and make sure that you understand what the requirements are. And if you don't understand, then you want to ask your board for help. You can ask the funder, but the funder does not actually represent you, and oftentimes will tell you that they cannot explain the contract to you. So you want to go to your board. If you are in a startup, sometimes what I say is the board is your spouse, your mama, and your cousin, because you're trying to do what you got to do. But if those people are not an attorney, a CPA, and a venture capitalist, or some other individual who is independently wealthy, you may not quite have the right composition on your board. You want to be sure that you have resources that you can go to help you understand your grants contracts. All right. Okay. So normal times, this is what happens when you get a grant. Next slide, please. We are in COVID-19 times. And so some funders are pivoting, canceling grants, and changing things. And so sometimes what we're seeing is you may have said, I am going to have this after school program in the school for the next year. And guess what? School is closed now. So is your program still viable if physical distancing continues? Can you pivot in any way to make your program, virtual, right? Some funders are looking to see, are you doing COVID-19 response work because they have decided as an institution that that's what they want to support now? Or are you performing work that is considered essential? This is what's happening right now. And again, this is another reason why sometimes grant funding isn't the best way to go, because you're at the whims of someone else. And they are frankly at the whims of their family, not family, but they're at the whims of whoever is making decisions about how funds are deployed. So in an ideal world, what we're seeing is funders that are being flexible with their grantees and the terms of their contracts. So this is actually a national conversation. It's called trust-based philanthropy. Truthfully, most foundations do not apply this to their grant-making strategy, but the more progressive ones do, and there's a movement to have more foundations do this. There was an article in the last week in the Chronicle of Philanthropy that actually talks about this. And I see there are some smaller organizations again on the call today. Unfortunately, the national trend is that organizations that are led by people of color and grassroots organizations tend to receive fewer grant dollars and with significantly more strength. And actually, if you give me a minute, I'll drop the link into the chat. If y'all want to take a look at that article, I see somebody's asking, will the slides be made available to you all? Yes, they will. But yeah, I mean, this is a real thing. And in COVID-19 times, again, grant making is just different. We're seeing canceled grant cycles, where you were expecting to be able to apply in a couple of months and they're just saying, nope, we're just not going to do that anymore. Again, looking for organizations working directly in emergency response. So what becomes really important is, next slide, please, to tell your story. You have to tell your story. No matter how you're funding your organization, you have to learn to tell your story. What are you doing? Who are you serving? What is the need that your organization has? It's not always money. And how have things changed? If you have a funder, right now you should be having these conversations. Funders are really busy right now, so you may not be their first priority, but you want to reach out and say, hey, we're still serving young people. We're still running our mentoring program. Instead of going to the schools, we're now virtual, or we are going by young people's houses and really just checking in with them on their social emotional well-being because they don't have the school connection, or we're grouping our young people together in a Zoom chat so that they can at least have a conversation with one another. But what are you doing during these times? Even if you've pivoted completely and realized, oh, you know what? We're no longer doing the core components of our mentoring program, but we know that a lot of our young people actually need food, laptops and Wi-Fi hotspots so that they can engage in online learning. Make sure you're talking about that and that you are still serving young people, young adults, whoever your core group constituency is, that you're still serving them. And then be honest about your need. And this is when sometimes we have a tendency to want to put our best face on something and to not exactly share everything that's going on. If you have a good relationship with your funders and even others, you want to be sharing, like, look, things have changed. Our events had to be canceled. We've lost donors, but we are still serving people. And so we still have a need in our organization. And so when we talk about telling your story, there are a number of different ways that this happens. One is performance metrics. If you don't have performance metrics, and we talk about this through the TIA that's provided through Maryland Mentor, if you don't have any type of evaluation system in place and you can't quantify what you're doing or even have qualitative data, then you may as well not have a program, because no one really knows the impact that you're having, including you, and that impacts the quality of your program. So you want to have that metric data that you can share with folks. You want to have pictures, because all of us love to see pictures of young people engaged and smiling and happy and joyous. Your narrative reporting. If you have a grant and you're submitting reports, you want to be able to tell a wonderful yarn in your narrative reporting. It's not just, hey, we got our money and we did this. You want to go into detail. And sometimes it feels like, well, I don't want to brag. Every Monday, I get an email from a local multi-million-dollar nonprofit that talks about how awesome they are. Now, they would not say that's what that email does, but it is what it does. They will share a testimonial from a parent of a child that says how much they appreciate the program, or there may be a social media post that they share that again talks about how great their program is, pictures of young people. It may even be a shout out to an employee because of the great job they're doing working with young people. That's the type of thing that keeps you front of mind to those who control philanthropic dollars in your local community. So use that social media. If you can get newspaper coverage, get that newspaper coverage at all times, not just during COVID-19 times, but these are things you want to constantly be doing throughout the year. If you are doing COVID-19 or emergent response work or emergency response work, you absolutely should be front and center right now in telling that story. Okay, next slide, please. All right, once again, relationships matter. That's why the slide is in here twice. So building those relationships with funders is really important. What is crucial, however, once you have an opportunity to access said relationships, is that you have yourself together. You were able to engage in that conversation and move it forward to get what you need for your organization. Next slide, please. And so going back to speaking funder and telling your story, put these together. Sometimes when nonprofits are telling their story, I may know a nonprofit, I may know their work, almost from a personal level, from having been engaged with that executive director, or just being familiar just in the philanthropic space of who's doing what. And then I will read what they submit in writing about their program. And it's like two different things. And I'm thinking to myself, there's so much that you left out of this written word. And so when we talk about Speak Funder, you're hearing the question, describe your program. What the funder is really asking you is, why should we give you money? So when you answer that question, in the back of your mind, you should always be thinking, okay, what they're really asking is, what do we do that would cause them to say, we should give them money? Who are you serving? Again, why should we give you money? Are you serving the same people that we as a foundation are interested in supporting? Now, whether you are, dealing with a family foundation, it might have someone's name on it, or if you're dealing with a corporation that has a foundation, each of them has an idea of how they want that money, like what impact they want that money to have, the priority areas, the people that they want to be impacted by it, etc. And so these funders are stewards of those funds. And so think of it this way. If you came to me and asked me for $100, and I went to Maryland Mentor, and I was like, yep, I need $100 because I want to give it to this program over here. Maryland Mentor is going to have a number of questions before they will allow me to give you that $100. Now, if I have $100 in my pocket, I'm like, what you going to do with it? And you'll tell me, and I'm like, sounds good, and I'm going to give it to you. It's a very different experience. So when you go to a funder, they are putting they're personally vouching for you. When they go to their board and say, we should fund them, or they go to someone who's above them and say, we should fund them, what they're doing is they're putting their personal credibility on the line for you. And so help them do that and feel like they're speaking and taking the right risk by answering their questions, describing your program in a way that explains why they should give you money, who you're serving, let them like this is aligned with what you as a foundation say you want to do. Be specific about how you will use the grant. I cannot tell you the number of times that people catch an attitude and we're like, how are you going to use the money? And I get it. You've been doing the work. You've shown that you can manage and deploy funds yourself. I absolutely get it. Why don't you trust me to do what I'm supposed to do? Again, if it's my money, different story. But if I have to go back, especially if it's public funds, and to justify how you spend it, like you better believe I'm be asking for a whole lot of documentation. Like that's just real. All right. And then the last one, when a grant application is asking for your budget, your board of directors, your audit, they're really asking that trust question. Like, show us how you're planning to use it. And granted, things change. And every funder understands that. If you say at the beginning of the year, I'm going to buy 36 basketballs and 46 pencils, it's like, you know what? At the end of the year, maybe you only needed 20 basketballs, but you need 127 pencils. People expect that. You know, it's really just continuing to have that conversation, but they want to have a sense upfront that you have truly thought about how you're going to use these funds. It makes sense. It matches your program. If you say you are mentoring youth in a community-based environment, and therefore you have a lot of spending around, let's say, deep background checks, not just the FBI background checks, but you do an in-depth suitability screening. And let's say you were hiring people that cost more than someone might normally expect. It makes sense. You're like, you know what, the risk is greater for community-based mentoring. And so we spend more money there than we might at a program that's at school where the teachers serve as mentors, right? So it's like that narrative should match. The audit shows your track record. Some of you may not be at a level where you would have an audited financial statement, but you want to be able to show that we've received funds in the past and we know how to manage or deploy them. That's really what's being asked here. So again, that question of speaking funder, you have to understand what they're not going to tell you that they don't trust you or they're not sure about trusting you, right? And this goes back to that philanthropy, Chronicle of Philanthropy article, that there is this inherent lack of trust, unfortunately, that exists. And again, this is the real talk. If you don't have that strong relationship with that funder already and you're taking that risk, they're not going to trust you 100%. It's like the first time you hire a babysitter for your kids. They may come with glowing references and they may be perfectly fine, but you are going to have your eyebrow up and be looking for things to make sure that everything is what everybody said it was going to be. All right. Okay. Next slide, please. All right. So now that for some of you are probably scared the bejesus out of you, here's are some grants and other resources that are currently available. Now, I do apologize for those of you who are calling from outside of the area. I am excited to see you on the call, but I don't have resources in New Jersey, DC per se. For Baltimore, we do have the COVID-19 Response Fund, which is actually a coordinated effort of a number of philanthropic institutions and organizations that have come together to put forward a $1.2 million fund. And it is open to a variety of nonprofits. It is not just large, well-established nonprofits. There are some requirements. Please go to the website, take a look and see what they're asking for. But they also have a list of which organizations have already received funds. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised to see that there are grassroots institutions in there. I also saw in the chat as people were checking in, some folks are coming from larger organizations. Those are being funded as well. So if you're local and you're doing something around COVID-19 response, and that could be, again, supporting young people in acquiring laptops, tablets, et cetera, to help young people get, or anything that is helping young people get engaged in this online and virtual learning environment. It could be food preparation and distribution. But again, take a look at those requirements and see if it links up. Now, I think everybody on the call has heard about CARES, particularly the Paycheck Protection Program, and those that nonprofits are eligible for this money. The first round of funding, we blew through, and I'm sure you've heard all the stories about who got funding and should they receive funding, et cetera. There is a second round of funding that is currently available. Lendistry has been doing a lot of work in Baltimore. I don't know if they're still accepting applications at this point in time, but check with your local lender. Those funds are still available. And my understanding, because I happen to have a family member that sits on the board of a regional bank, is that the applications that are coming in during this round are for much smaller amounts of money. The first time people were applying for the Paycheck Protection Program, these were large organizations. You had to have 500 or fewer employees, but you would hear about restaurant chains that were applying, hotel chains that were applying, asking for millions of dollars. What we're seeing in this second round is that the request is significantly smaller, that it's more around $79,000 on average, with a lot of small businesses, smaller nonprofits asking for money in the $10,000 to $25,000 range. So take a look at that. And then just this week, the Baltimore Small Business Assistance Fund launched. And they are not issuing grants on a first come, first served basis. Yay! Because they are interested in equity and inclusion. And so they are really taking a look at these applications. They're looking for people that are either in underserved communities that may not have the connections that other people do, because that became the issue with CARES. Do you have a business banking relationship with someone? Let this be a lesson for those on the phone, particularly if you are an executive director or you have your own nonprofit. It is important to establish these relationships now, even when you may not have much. And I did the same thing when I first started my consulting business. I thought, well, I'm only doing this. And my husband kept saying, you need to get a business banking relationship. You need to have a person that you can call when you need them. So I encourage you to do the same thing. That advice that I received has helped me tremendously over the years. And so I encourage you again to do the same thing. Start to build that relationship, because in times like this, they become a lifeline. And then lastly, money is not everything, right? And so now is a good time to plan around technical assistance. Maryland Mentor, one of the best places to go to start that TA conversation. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and TA can help you with that. Other times you do know that you need a lot of things, and sometimes people will come to the TA consultant and say, I need everything, right? And then you start to figure out, okay, really, where should we focus our time? But during this period of time where things are crazy, like, this is a good time to plan. For those of you who just started your programs recently, it's a little bit of a challenge right now because people are distracted. And I don't want you to be discouraged. I just want you to understand that people are distracted. And so you have groups, you have people in the nonprofit space that run large, nonprofits where their budgets are tens of millions of dollars that can't currently pay their staff. So you could be in that situation right now. That is those are the scenarios that are really taking up a fair amount of space right now in the ecosystem, and having conversations of how do we keep not only them afloat, how do we keep our fiscal sponsors, which support a number of grassroots programs, how do we keep them healthy? Again, a lot of conversation in these areas. So while folks are distracted, use this time for technical assistance and planning. All right, next slide, please. Okay, and so ordinarily I would be spending a lot more time in addressing other revenue streams. We're going to spend a little less time on that today, but hopefully it will be enough to get you started and get you rolling. And so some of those areas that you can tap into are individual donors, fee for service, events, and collaborations. Yep, next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so A lot of times people will come and say, all right, how do I start raising money? You have to ask for it, right? Like money's not just going to jump up, come into your house and be like, oh, yep, okay, here it is. And so this is an example of how you would raise $5,000 through individual donors. 5 donors can give you $1,000, 10 donors can give you $500, or 200 donors can give you $25. Now, for each one of those categories, it's the same question. What's my pool of prospects? The first 5 people you approach for $1,000, probably not going to give it to you. You really want to have a prospect pool of about 25 to 30 people who have the capacity to give $1,000. And then some of them will eventually tell you yes. It's going to be the same thing with your $500 donors. It's not just going to be, okay, you ask 10 people and you get it. You're going to have to ask maybe 50 people before you get it. Same thing with the smaller donors. And so there are a couple of things to think about when you start doing individual donations. One, you should always know what someone's capacity to give is. Not what your capacity to give is, but what someone else's capacity to give is. And sometimes we get into this trap of, well, times are hard, and so I don't want to ask. Let that person tell you no. Now, if you know straight up, I mean, you've seen the person begging on the corner, they can't buy groceries, you probably don't want to ask them for a donation for your organization. But all of us know someone that typically has some extra money, or we may know people who are philanthropic in some way. Like those are people you want to start drafting a list of, okay, these are folks I want to approach. These are potential prospects. And for each one, you want to think about how to approach them. It isn't that, okay, I'm going to see so-and-so in the supermarket and I'm going to ask them, hey, can I get $1,000 from my organization? Nope, that's not how it works. There needs to be a really targeted approach and thoughtful approach of one, how you explain what you're doing. Sometimes people know you have a program, but they don't really know what you're doing in that program. It goes back to that slide of tell your story. Be sure people know what you're doing, how you're engaging, who you're helping, and the impact that it has in community. And this is the important part, you want to hear what's important to them. Because sometimes in our desire to raise money, we talk a lot. Right? We may be uncomfortable. We may be wondering, okay, when exactly do I ask? And so to fill the space, we start talking as opposed to it being a conversation and listening to what the person is asking you. So just like, do you speak thunder? And you're listening for what they're really asking. You want to do the same thing when you're approaching individual donors. What is it that they're passionate about? Where do their eyes light up? Do they have a past experience in mentoring? What was that like? What was the impact it had in their life? What do they think, do they have children? Do their children have mentors? Are they formal mentors, informal mentors? What difference has it made in the child's life? These are all the things that you want to start to get into when you're having these conversations. But the other point, quite frankly, of this slide is to let you know, you will be asking for money over and over and over and over again. And I want you to be very comfortable doing it. This is actually hard for adults because if you go to the first 4 people and they say no, we tend to get discouraged. It's like, I don't really want to ask to begin with, and then they're telling me no. Young people do not have any qualms about asking the same question over and over and over again. If you have children or you work with children, you know this to be true. They will keep asking. They are undeterred. They are tenacious. And so what you're going to have to do is channel that in your fundraising. You are not raising money because you want to go out and buy a pair of shoes or an iPhone. You are raising money to advocate for your youth and ensure that they have the best possible future. And that is why you ask for money over and over and over again. That is critical. I cannot emphasize that enough, that's got to be what you keep in your mind. I am asking on behalf of my youth. This is how they are going to succeed. If my program can't succeed, then I may not be able to help these young people be and just meet their full potential. So it's like when you get tired, and you will get tired, that's real talk, you will get tired. You will feel like I'm always asking for money. I am always on. I'm always trying to figure out, how to do this. You think about your young people. And for your smaller organizations, I think you're used to scratching and trying to figure out how to put it together. But I want you to start to get to a point where this is structured and you have a schedule and okay, these are the touches I'm going to make today. These are the people I'm going to reach and in this way. And this is what I'm going to do around fundraising today. This is just in your donor pool. But if you neglect this, you will always be struggling. You will always, always, always be struggling. Now, I think I saw a couple folks on here that are with government organizations. Obviously, your structure is going to be a little bit different, where you probably have a fiscal sponsor that can receive individual donations. Most likely, some of you may have a slightly different situation. And if so, I ask you to shout that out in the Q&A and let us know, are you looking for something a little bit different? But for the overwhelming majority of you, individual donations is really going to be a significant part of your bread and butter when it comes to raising funds for your organization. All right, next slide, please. Okay, now we talk about donors during COVID-19. Reality is, some people have gotten hammered. Either their stock portfolio has been hammered, and so they may not be giving what they used to give. Other people doing quite well. Some people may have lost their jobs, and so again, impacts their ability and their capacity to give. But again, let them tell you. And I want to tell you a story. This goes back to the question of knowing someone's capacity to give. And what we typically do in nonprofits is we don't ask for enough. Some of the donor feedback in a number of national polls indicates this. They say, you know what, I'm really passionate about this organization. They asked me for money, but they didn't really ask me to go deep in my pocket, and I'm a little bit disappointed. And this is where you start to get into the donor psyche. Someone asked me for a gift one time. They invited me to breakfast. I knew they were going to ask for money. I went, we kind of knew each other before, et cetera. When they finally asked for a gift, for a number, if I struggle, but no one's going to say to you, wow, why would you ever think I would have that much money in my wallet? So you ask for the stretch, right? That is not offensive. Sometimes we feel like it's offensive. It is not offensive. During COVID-19 times, you may be asking someone for money that they no longer have the capacity to give, but let them tell you that. Don't make an assumption. Because if you come to me and you're like, hey, Kara, I get $5. I'm trying to run this organization over here. I'm thinking to myself, I'm gonna give you the $5. You probably could have got more, but that's what you asked for. So I did want to share that tidbit with you. Okay, so right now, COVID-19 times, how do you reach your individual donors? You want to be doing an urgent direct appeal to your existing donors. Now, you should already know who has given you money in the past. It cost you a lot to acquire these donors. You may not know that it cost you a lot, but it did. It cost you conversation time. It cost you some paperwork. It cost you, writing thank you notes. You need to steward those donors. You need to be in conversation with those donors on a regular basis, not just a, hey, I'm asking for money conversation, but here's what we're doing. Maybe you might like to come to this event. Maybe you might like to come and do a site visit, and spend some time seeing what we do. But you want to do an urgent and direct appeal to those donors yesterday, right? Then you have your new donors. So think about, mailers, the solicitations that you get in the mail. Excuse me, you've seen some appeals on social media. They're trying to capture two groups. Their existing donors, which are already linked to your, they've already liked your your Facebook page, or they may be following you on Instagram or Twitter already. So you'll reach them. And then hopefully you're getting some new donors as well, because you are posting something of interest that people are going to read. And for those that may have some disposable income right now, and they really want to be engaged in some type of COVID-19 response, but let's say they're not frontline workers and they don't really know where they can slot in, they know they can give money. And so you want to be capturing those people. And then now this is actually a good time to call your existing donors. Not all your donors, because phone calls take a lot of time and energy, but you want to call your donors that are giving the most or giving most frequently. And just check in. How are they doing? Have a conversation. So see what they're up to, share what you're up to. And then you're asking for, you're doing a solicitation over the phone. So again, I go back to what I said before, you're going to be asked, you have to get comfortable asking for money over and over and over again. And sometimes it feels weird to be asking for money during COVID-19 time, especially if you're not in response work, but young people still need support even now. It's like if you were fundraising after September 11th and your project was not related to anything in New York or DC or overseas, you still had to operate at a time when the nation was in shock and people were pulling back on funding and the markets were volatile. It's like, you still got to run your program. And you can have that conversation in your phone calls with your most committed donors. And so that's one of the things that you should be doing during these COVID-19 times. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, fee for service. Basically, what can I sell and who can I sell it to? And a lot of times you'll hear nonprofits talk about fee for service. We're trying to move to a fee for service model. This is actually where you have the most control over your revenue and over your funding streams, because it comes down to sales. You're not waiting for a grant decision where you don't know who's on the board of trustees that may be weighing in on whether or not you get it. And, maybe you had a meeting with the funder and you got the impression that you said something they didn't like, or you're wearing a red dress and they said to you, I hate red dresses. So you're thinking, oh, I'm not going to get, any funding now. Fee for service is pretty simple. Do you sell memberships, for example? Can you offer trainings that you can charge people to attend? So for example, there's an organization I know, she's very small, she's very grassroots, but they have someone in their organization that does the Stop the Bleed training. And so every nonprofit and even for-profits should be going to that training. And so that's something that they offer. It's for a fee, but it supports, it's part of the revenue, it supports the core work that they do. Speaking engagements. Is there someone in your organization that other people might pay to hear, talk about a specific topic? Mandatory fees. And I want to be careful about how I say this, because I said mandatory fees, or even fees. If you go to a Boys and Girls Club, there is a fee to join. Now, sliding scale, and if a child can't afford it, there are programs, but there's a fee. And that helps support their everyday operations, the maintenance of the buildings, the people who are in the buildings, the programs they offer, etc. Voluntary fees. You would be surprised what people are willing to pay for if you ask them. Something that might, and I'll give a very small example that really helped our bottom line at Big Brothers Big Sisters. When you have 1,000 volunteers, that's a lot of background checks. And those background checks start to add up. And so we would be spending money to do those every year. We started asking if our bigs and people who were applying to be bigs would pay the fee. Actually, if they would pay the fee and a little bit more. And you've seen those times where it's like, will you round up? Will you do this? Will you do that? That helps your bottom line. And next thing you knew, we were saving like 5 figures, numbers that were in the 5 figures just on background checks. And then there is that line in between. There's the voluntary fee, there's the mandatory fee, and then there's the, we would request that you would do such and such. So if you go to, let's say, an art museum, and I think the Philadelphia Art Museum used to do this, on Sundays, technically it was free, but they would request a $5 contribution. You could choose not to pay it and you would still get in, but you request and you were specific about that request. And most people would pay it. If you didn't have it, you didn't have it. But if you had it, most people will give it to you. They want to be helpful. And so this is a very quick encapsulation of fee for service. Okay, next slide, please. Events. Nonprofits love their events. Every time you turn around, this is pre-COVID-19, but every time you turn around, somebody's having an event. You go online on, Mission Text, Ticketmaster, you're always seeing these little events. You're always getting an email, okay, will you come to my event? And the prices range from, $10 or $15 to $250 a ticket or more, right? Here's the bottom line. Events take a lot of time, a lot of energy, and people often don't want to go. So before you say, we're going to fund our organization with 10 events, the first question I ask you to ask yourself is your event fun? People want to go to fun things, even if it's not related to your charity. Like, would you go to this type of thing if it wasn't for charity? If the answer is no, now you're asking me to do something specifically for you, right? And you'll get some people who love you will go, but people who don't are going to say no, thank you. Is your event different? People are always looking for different experiences. Again, a lot of times people will go to things that they may not have a tie to your organization, but they'll hear about something and say, oh, that's different. I want to go to that. Oh, they're having one of the white party dinners, or where everyone wears all white and shows up like at a secret location. Is it something that is exclusive or fun or different, or like, this is something I want to be a part of? Your test for that is, would your friends want to go? If they weren't friends with you, would they want to go to your event? That's really a great test. Would you want to go if it wasn't your nonprofit? I remember I was at an organization and I kept hearing from the staff that the annual event the previous year was boring. Like, the staff is saying, well, the event was kind of boring, and they put it on, right? You don't want to be in that situation, because guess what? I had already heard it was boring from the people who went, many of whom did not return for the following year, even though we changed it up significantly. You really, if you mess up an event once, you're going to lose some people. So you want to be thoughtful about how you do it. And then again, think about your return on investment. If it requires you to spend 300 hours and to spend $5,000 or $50,000, and then you only make, let's say, $6,000 or $55,000, it's like, was that worth it? Was it worth it to commit all of that time and energy and stress and uncertainty? Because an event, you're typically outlaying cash before it all comes in. So if you don't have resources already, or you don't have access to a line of credit, you don't have, funds at your disposal, then you're really taking a risk of, like, you may end up in debt after your event. I'm not saying you shouldn't have an event. I'm saying you need to think about all these things before you go ahead and say, we're going to do this kind of event. And then now you want to think about, can you do a virtual event? Because with social distancing or physical distancing, even though the state of Maryland is starting to open up and Virginia is a little more open, and I think DC is a little bit further behind, New Jersey and the surrounding areas are having conversations about when to open. Keep in mind that just because you open doesn't mean people are trying to come. And this is what we're seeing now in states like Georgia, and Oklahoma, where places have opened up and people still aren't returning to the businesses and the areas that they used to. And so if you're thinking to yourself, well, maybe later in the year, these are uncertain times. Events in October and November are already being canceled because people don't think that there's going to be a strong enough turnout. So just keep that in mind. Virtual takes a lot of that uncertainty out of the picture. All right, next slide, please. Okay, and then the last part, money isn't everything. I said this before. Think about collaborations, right? This is also free. or you can collaborate out what you can, and you ask for what you need. All right, slide, please. All right, real talk. Life is different now and will be for some time. That's just real. It's all like to know what's happening, when it's going to happen, etc. Things are going to be different for quite some time. They're already talking about how we bring young people back to school in the fall on a staggered schedule. Every other week, somebody goes in the morning, you sit over there. We just don't know. And so you have to be comfortable with that uncertainty and try to figure out something that works. Lost my connection. All right, hopefully y'all can hear me.
Okay, we can hear you now, Kera.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that. Like I said, lost my connection. All right. You may need to put your program on pause for a minute and focus on rebuilding. And that's okay. People are expecting that that may indeed happen. And so again, if you need to rebuild or rethink things, it's okay to come offline. You need to communicate with the young people that you serve and their families, but to go offline for a minute and figure out, okay, how do I get it back together? And it may be that you're struggling to manage just your own things with your kids being home from school and you're trying to work, or you may have lost a job, or any number of things that's impacting your ability to provide services. It's okay to be on pause. And then the last thing is, merger is not failure. The truth is, I know people don't necessarily want to hear it, but the truth is, there are going to be some nonprofits that don't make it, just like there are going to be some for-profit businesses that don't make it. And so you want to start being real about what does your financial picture look like? And you can go to the next slide, Sarah. What does your financial picture look like? What's the honest assessment of our future? And if it's not looking great, can we find an allied organization where we might be able to do a merger and be stronger? So think about that. Again, that's not failure, that's being smart and resourceful. And we want to see more organizations do that rather than just closing your doors, because that means that your young people don't get served anymore. And so the next steps are, again, once you have that honest conversation, what will you do tomorrow to support the financial future of your organization? What about next month? It's easy to say, oh, I'll do this later. Later never comes. And so tomorrow you have to be doing something to generate revenue. It could be, okay, you're starting your list of individual donors. It could be you're starting a one pager that describes your program that you can give to people, that talks about, okay, this is what we do, this is who we serve. So what are you going to do tomorrow? And then start to lay out, okay, this is my plan for how I move forward. And then finally, am I doing my best? Our best right now may look very different than what our best looked like 4 months ago. I can tell you that at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you do not want to be having a conversation with me because my brain is done. And I used to be able to just crank until late at night. But my best is 4 o'clock. And it's okay for that to be where you are. Your best may be, okay, I can only do 2 hours of commitment to this work today. Are you doing whatever that best is for you? And if not, just understandable, how can I do better? Either how, and it may be, how do I manage my stress better so that I can focus on these other things? It could be, okay, I need to turn off Netflix and maybe not turn it on in the morning, first thing in the morning. Whatever that is, to start to have those conversations with yourself. This is about self-evaluation. All right, next slide, please. Okay, and so again, we want to really be connected, particularly during these times. You always want to be connected, but especially now. And so these are some great resources. Maryland Mentor, cannot say enough positive things. If you are not connected with Maryland Mentor, I do not know why. You need to get connected with them. Maryland nonprofits, This is an organization that really is about supporting nonprofits throughout the state of Maryland. And so it isn't just mentoring organizations. You're going to find a wide range of organizations, but that are all dealing with many of the same issues, challenges, and they're really big on peer learning. So there are more than 1,000 members, and you can get resources on how to strengthen your board, how to do a budget, how to do bylaws for your board, how to strengthen your program. Somebody asked a random question about insurance, and so there's a whole thread on that. But this is a really great resource. Some of which are free. It is an organization that you pay to join, but they do have some free resources. But you really want to get connected with them and use it to connect with other nonprofits. Another great way to connect with nonprofits is the Impact Hub, which is located in downtown Baltimore on North Avenue. Again, a lot of organizations use it's a co-working space, but they also do a lot of programming. And again, a fair amount of peer learning, but they also bring in outside speakers. You don't have to be using the co-working space to benefit from Impact Hub, webinars, conversations, etc. They were doing a weekly luncheon online, for the last several weeks. They also will push out a number of resources, often around funding. So you want to get on that distribution list to learn about that. It's local funding, but it's also some national funding. So those of you who are not in Baltimore, you probably want to get on that distro. Then the last one is Nonprofit AF, formerly Nonprofit with Balls. This is a national blog run by a gentleman who used to be an executive director, but is now speaking full-time and working on the blog full-time. But he really gets into the equity and access issues, and he speaks the truth. He tells it like it is. He experiences many of the frustrations that other organizations do, and really provides some good guidance and advice, and really is a great advocate for nonprofits. And again, a lot of national place-based organizations, so they're local organizations, will tap into Nonprofit AF. So now you're getting some national connections, someone who does some work that you do, but in another state. And so if you have other ways to get connected and organizations that you think are good for folks, I ask you to shout them out in the chat box and share those with one another. All right, Sarah. Next slide. I think it's time for the survey.
Yes, as Kera said, please do share those other resources. And once again, these slides will be shared. We'll be emailing out the slides, and this recording will also be shared, and we'll house this on our website, and we'll send that link the same time that we send these slides over. So please, like I said earlier, evaluations are very, very important to us. We want to get everyone's feedback. It's super quick, less than 5 minutes. And I'm going to drop the link here. So if you guys can just go ahead and fill out this survey. I'm going to wait, a few minutes until I get some numbers in. And then after that will be an opportunity for Kera to answer all the questions that we have. And so far we only have one question, but please use the Q&A box so that way we can get, just more questions answered. We have one in so far. Thank you for that person who just responded to the evaluation. And as we're waiting for more folks to complete the evaluation, I'm going to share some upcoming webinars that Maryland Mentor will be having Oops, that was my mistake. So May 8th, today, 2 p.m., we have another COVID-19 virtual youth training series. And this one is titled Self-Care Strategies for Youth Workers, Students, and Families. You can sign up going into our website under events. And there is the link right there, register marylandmentor.net/events. Today, 2 p.m. This is, I believe it's our 5th one right now. And then May 22nd, that's a typo on my end, but May 22nd, we have our next one is, it's a virtual explorative circle, the Untown Hall edition. So please do sign up for that as well. And we have our own individual Maryland Mentor trainings coming up. There's the Opiate Crisis Virtual Forum. That's on May 21st. It's a morning webinar or training. And then we have our last one for the spring, June training, which is on June 4th. Best practices for training mentors. We also do have a panel of new trainings for summer and fall that we will share out in our newsletter next month. And if there are any trainings that you're interested that you would want us to host, please let us know, email us, and we can make that happen, because we know what we think most programs will want, but sometimes it may be totally opposite than what you guys are asking for. So please do let us know what topics you all are interested in. All right, let's see if we got more evaluations coming in. Only 4 more people. And then please do use the chat box for the different resources that Kera had asked for, if there's any other things that programs should know more about. All right, we can go ahead and just move on to questions. So, the first question, which is only question, please y'all do ask more questions. Kera is here, to answer any and all questions. So this first question here is, do you need to be a nonprofit or a registered 501c3 to apply for grants?
Okay, great question. So generally speaking, foundations will require you to be either a 501c3 or to have a fiscal sponsor. And that is because there are requirements that foundations have to meet, tax requirements and tax implications. If you receive grant funds and you are not, let's say you're able to receive them, and you're not a 501c3, that's considered income for your organization, and it would be taxed. So a fiscal sponsor is an organization that has a 501c3. They basically serve as your financial infrastructure for your organization. They can receive a grant on your behalf and then cede the money to you. So that is an option. There was something that I saw as I looked through the chat, and I again looked to see who was here. For some of the schools and other places, some of you are probably going to need to focus on government grants. That's probably most likely, or you may be able to seek grants from larger nonprofits like Gates Foundation, et cetera. Some of you will need to seek funds through your school districts. And so there's a whole system that you need to go through. If you're seeking money this way, it tends to be a little more tedious and a bit more work. But for everyone, if you're looking for grant monies, you have to figure out who funds what you do. I always start locally. Who locally funds what I do? And then zero in on creating relationships with those folks. If you're a smaller local program, it is unlikely that you're going to get money from a national foundation. But if you're a school or you're more established or you're a government institution, that's when you can tend to tap into a Gates Foundation, a Ford Foundation, et cetera. It's not like this. Sometimes I think people think this is magic, like, oh, I'll log onto this webinar and I'll find out I can go to these 8 places and probably get money. Nope, like it just doesn't work that way. You are going to be asking again and again and again. You're going to be networking your way into relationships that get you money. You're going to be building that individual donor base, and you're going to be thinking about that fee for service. What can I sell? What do I have that other people want that I can put a price tag on? Those are going to be your key components. And then again, if you want to do events, you're going to be thinking about, okay, if I'm going to put this event on, what is the purpose of it? How much am I going to spend to do it? And how much do I think am I going to raise? And are people going to want to go?
Okay. Thank you, Kera. Also, if those for who would rather not type in the chat box or the Q&A box, you can raise your hand. There's a format here that you can raise your hand and I can unmute you and you can actually just ask questions live. So we'll wait till we get more questions. Looks like that people are saying no questions. So I'm guessing, Kera, that you probably just said everything that, you know, that they needed to hear. It was super useful. Let's see. Okay, there's another anonymous question here. What is the best way to build relationships with funders during this time?
Oh, that's a really good question because no one's in the office, right? The best way is actually to get a soft introduction. So that is, someone who knows that funder will introduce you. And I will tell you that typically a person who's going to do that is someone who knows you well and knows your program well. I can tell you that I have had clients that I've worked with through Maryland Mentor that after working together, I've introduced to funders. Those that meet those that implement the elements of effective practice and really move on to become, to complete the NM. What am I trying to say, Seth? I'm losing the words, the NQMS. So those that complete NQMS and, are on their way to gold standard programs, like those are the programs where people are willing to stand up and say, okay, you know what, this is legit. They're trying to do, again, the elements of effective practice. And to have evidence-based practices, that's who funders want to meet. Now, if you happen to randomly run across a funder and they're like, hey, let's stay in touch, stay in touch. Take the phone, take the card, reach out to them. Hey, I met you at such and such. You gave me your card. Just would love to share a little bit about the program, or maybe I can invite you to a virtual session, or, just again, it's almost, you meet someone in the supermarket and you want to get to know them. It's like, how do you strike up a conversation that doesn't make you look creepy?
Okay. So it looks like we don't have any more questions. I'll still wait here, but I just want to thank you, Kera, for doing this webinar for us today. And again, we'll only know if this was super useful if the surveys are completed, and if this is something that more folks will want to have, that you would want to share with your colleagues, so that way we can bring Kera back to have maybe either a part 2 or just like another repeat of this. Some folks are saying thank you. So here we have Kera's email address. This is the best way to contact her. I'm sure there's other questions that you think will be possibly more valuable to have a one-on-one with Kera. So please do email Kera at KeraRitter@theRitterGroupLLC.com.
And I'm also on LinkedIn. If you don't want to, it seems like a lot of letters to type in. It's like, I'm Kera Ritter on LinkedIn. Feel free to message me that way as well.
Perfect. Any last words, Kera?
I just want to say thank you, everybody. It's a Friday in the middle of the day, and just excited that you have an interest in figuring out how to better fund your organizations, how to continue to grow and develop. This isn't always sexy, but it is really important. And I want to thank everyone on the call for the work that you do with young people. Not everyone can do what you do. And I say that as someone who, you don't want me in front of your young people, right? So I really have the utmost respect for everyone on this call who is leading and guiding and mentoring and shaping lives. Thank you so much for your commitment.
All right. Thank you for all who attended today. Thank you, Kera, once again, for just providing a very successful webinar with us today. Okay, and we hope to see you guys during our next webinar. I'll put the dates up here again. Here, but thank you all.
Have a good weekend, everyone.